Welcome back, campers, to another Camp Legend Lorcana video. I'm Gibbles and Bits. With me, I have my best friend, Dead Broke Nerd, and we are going to be doing a 4-part mini-series as we lead up to the dropping of Into the Inklands, the third set for the Lorcana trading card game. Real quick, though, if you do like this content and any of the videos that we're putting out, feel free to like and subscribe on the YouTube channel. That's the best way to help us out here. Come join us on Discord, where people are going to be sharing their decks, talking about the new cards, all the new things that they're crafting. We would love to see you over there. So the first video of the 4 that we're going to do in this mini series is going to be focused on aggro lists, and then we're going to go through in the later videos a different kind of deck for each of the different later videos. So we'll hit mid-range, we'll hit control, we'll hit combo, but why not start out with the go fast, go aggro decks out the gate? So I've got one I'm going to share, and DBN has something special for us. He is that good at deck building that he has built the same kind of deck in 3 different ways. Not to spoil what you're doing here, but you've made something special here, and it should be noted. So
all right,
we're going to go ahead and start sharing our screen here, and we'll dive into the videos. Okay, first up is my deck that I built from an aggro variant. It's called Protect the President. I did put aggro at the front of this because I also built a mid-range version, but I think DBN and I agreed that the aggro version looks a little bit more promising so far, at least just from like the eye test perspective. So we'll see how it plays when we actually get to sit down at the table across from an opponent. But this is a bodyguard heavy deck with both amber and steel, not an unpopular combo. From a color combination perspective, Steel Song is very popular, but this is taking it in a whole new different direction. We've got a lot of the new cards in here. So Lilo, Making a Wish, and Pluto, a Friendly Pooch are our 1-drops, all uninkable, but usually 1-drops are really not that much of a problem for uninkables just because they don't tend to stay in your hand for too long. Pluto is a new card where you pay 1 less for the next character you play this turn. You can already see how this would be helpful for an aggro deck. You want to go fast. You want to get more characters out faster. So we're going to try to get them out quicker, get more expensive units out quicker before our opponent can kill them. But what's a better way to protect Pluto than behind a bunch of bodyguards? So we've got, on a bodyguard perspective, Simba, Protective Cub, which you can drop for 2 if you don't want to ink straight away, or you just want to play it for 2. If you ink on your second turn, you can play Baloo, which DBN and I both agree, this is going to be a very great card for aggro decks going forward. It does have bodyguard, and it is uninkable, so if you can fit it in your deck, it's going to be fantastic. It's got a 0-3 stat line, which isn't the most attractive, but doesn't have to have a great stat line. When it's got the ability of when this character is banished and leaves play, you gain 2 lore. So it's protecting your units, and then it's going to gain you towards your win condition when your opponent has to spend time and resources to remove it. DBN, do you have anything you want to say about Baloo real quick?
No, I think it's a great card, and one of the things that you would ideally like to see with Baloo is if you can get it out early from Pluto, it is about a 50-50 shot that they can actually get rid of it for that first turn. And so you bring it in with bodyguard because you're trying to protect a Lilo or a Pluto. But if you go first, you play Pluto, and then on your second turn, you exert Pluto and drop Baloo. Unless they played a Rafiki or a Captain Hook on turn 1, there's very little chance of them actually getting rid of this. And if this lasts even 1 more turn, the value it's created has been astronomical, because it's going to give them a hurdle to jump over, and you're going to be able to quest with it, which it only quests for 1, but then eventually when it's banished, it'll gain 2. And so if you have a 3 cost for 3 lore exchange, that's real good. Blue's I'm honestly a little surprised they printed an effect like this. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's great, and I love to see it in amber, though. I think it's the right color for it. I can also see it in something like an emerald, too. But so you've got another 3-drop here for a good bodyguard of the Prince. So even if you don't find Baloo, the Prince is another very sticky, also nice questing bodyguard that you can find on 3 off of Pluto's effect. But in case you don't find Pluto, and maybe you drop Lilo instead, we do still have bodyguards on 2 between Simba and Kita. Kita is new, the 2-3 bodyguard. Great stat line. We've seen how strong since the beginning of the game Simba has been as a 2-3 bodyguard stat line. They're the exact same card, but now it's in steel. So we're doubling up on a great stat line at an early drop state that we would love to see either of those. I've got Minnie Mouse Musical Artist in here. This is a new card that can sing for 3. Which is, we're not necessarily taking as big of a chance here on the mini mouse with the singing perspective of it, but it heals anytime you play a bodyguard up to 2 damage from one of your chosen characters. So it keeps your your board state around a little bit longer. And let's say they're trying to like whittle down a Baloo or whittle down the Prince or Tiana, especially with these resist units. You're healing them back up, and you're making it even tougher for them to clear. So you've got sticky units, you've got some healing to be able to hide behind, and you've got this new card here, new legendary Kita, Protector of Atlantis, which you can shift in because we've got the 2-drop Kita. So you can drop this on 3. When you play this character, all characters get -3 attack until the start of your next turn. That's basically almost like a time stop. It's almost like you've just frozen the board in place for a turn, where you can still quest all you want to, and your opponent can quest, but odds are you're not going to be able to kill anything, which is fantastic in what you're trying to do. You just don't want your opponent messing with your game plan. You just want to continue working towards yours.
Yeah, what's really nice about Kita, honestly, is the fact that I'll throw this out there just in case there's any confusion, because I've seen these questions popping up. Kita, no, it does not affect any cards that come into play after she's been played. And so it only affects the things that are on the board when she hits the board. That being said, there are a lot of times, especially with your low attack characters like Pluto, who has 0, Baloo that has 0, you're not trading back into the things as they kill you. And so they've got, Captain Hook that takes out your Baloo. Well, that Captain Hook's still sticking around, right? And so Kita being able to, reset all the things that are going to keep hammering onto your characters down to hopefully 0 or close to is going to buy you an entire extra turn. Really, really cool card. And I think Gibby and I are both somewhat optimistic about its place in aggro.
Yeah. And then Pluto, Determined Defender. It's a shift 5 off of your 1-drop Pluto if you're able to keep Pluto around, or maybe you see it on a later turn where it's got bodyguard, and at the start of your turn, remove up to 3 damage from this character. So it's just a really, really sticky bodyguard that, unless they have something like a Dragonfire or Let It Go, then where it just removes it off of the board entirely without having necessarily had to eat through the defense stat there. Pluto's going to be around for a while. One of my favorite cards, and I'm really excited about, especially for a format like this, is 99 Puppies. Now, it's meant to be with the whole, like, at least from a meme perspective, all of the dogs and the puppies, because you can put so many of them in your deck. But whenever one of your characters quests this turn, gain 1 lore. So you kind of see the end in sight. There's light at the end of the tunnel, and you've got a couple units left on board. Maybe you've just time stopped everything with Kita for a turn, and post that turn, you're like, okay, it's time to finish this. You drop 99 Puppies, everything on your board gets +1 lore, and then you just quest to high heaven up to 20. Or at least get close to it and just threaten lethal on your opponent the next turn before they can really do anything about it. And then they have to focus on clearing your entire board. 99 Puppies is a really exciting card if you can set it up. It's why we're only running 2 copies of it, but it is, in this kind of case, a game ender. I did include 2 copies of Frying Pan in here because I also think this is a funny and interesting, like, stop your opponent in their tracks from being able to clear a unit. We've talked, DBN and I have talked, and maybe he's trying to bring me back down to earth on this one because Frying Pan has not been used since the game has launched, and this is a base set card. Realistically, this card probably, instead of Frying Pan, is something like a Strength of a Raging Fire or some other utility card that also helps you quest and or remove a unit if you feel like you need a slight bit of removal or card draw. But I personally can see the use of Frying Pan, but this it might change in the coming days. By the time this video releases, you might see Frying Pan no longer in there for something a little bit more conventional.
Yeah, I'm not as big on the Frying Pan. I've consulted the oracles. The oracles have told me Frying Pan will not be in the meta, but it is funny. And effects like that are interesting. It's sometimes you can catch your opponent by surprise with the unique tech like that. I'm just I think that this might not be the list for it. But one thing I want to shout out too, there are a lot of options. So like, you might test out Pluto and realize, well, my one drop Pluto is dead most of the time. I'm not getting the shift. There's a lot of other things you can try out in here, right? Like you can try out like Mufasa. This is mostly characters, and he can be pretty good at pushing through some extra lore because he'll replace himself when he goes down. I also think that there's the potential to add in some more early game with like a little baby Kita, little one drop Amber Kita for an extra
Yeah.
shift target. Alternatively, you could go for Stitches, Rockstar Stitch, and New Dog Stitch, and then you have two dogs for the one drops. There's a lot of
Yeah.
ways this can be molded, but the whole like discount things with Pluto and Doc, have resilient characters with bodyguard in front of your squishy characters that quests. Like it's a tried and true formula, but it's not one that we've seen it's not one that we've seen have as many options as this deck. And Gibby and I were talking about that. We're like, wow, this deck actually has a lot of different directions you could play it. And that's generally the sign of a deck that can make an impact in a meta game, is if it's not like you're scratching and clawing to figure out the last 5 cards, because usually those don't have a lot of wiggle room.
Yeah, and there's a mid-range variant that I had mentioned on this that we had also kind of toyed around with, where trading out some of the 3s and 4s and maybe even the 99 puppies, but I think we would keep it in there. But trading out some of those 3s and 2s and 4s for kind of a little bit mid to late game package, something a little bit stronger as you move into turn 5. I mean, Prince John. No, I'm sorry, not Prince John. Oh goodness,
Prince Eric?
the bear. No, the
Oh
bear.
no, Little John.
Little John, not Prince John.
That's
I was like, I knew it had
yeah.
something to do with John. Little John. They've printed that 6-drop Little John that when he is exerted, all of your bodyguards get +1 resist. So they stick around a little bit longer. And they also gain a lore to them, which is a great card to have. And it's shiftable. There's a 2-drop that you can slot in there instead. So even just
I think it's a 3-drop.
You're right, it's a 3-drop, but like switching out the Kita package, like you can get rid of the 5-drop Kita and the 2-drop Kita for both copies of Little John, is a very easy thing to do. So there's definitely some mid to late game options if you want to play more of a mid-range version of this deck as well that you can switch over to.
Yeah.
Well, that's going to about do it for my Protect the President aggro. So we're going to move over into DBN's list. So first, we're going to take a look at his variant of his Lefou fighters, that is Amber and Ruby. So DBN, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, so you'll note this looks semi-similar to Gibby's Amber list, in that there are a few things that are pretty standard, I feel like, if you're going to run an Amber aggro now with some of the new cards. But the thing that I really want to focus on is, I think we may have just seen the most impactful aggro card enter the format, which is Simba, Scrappy, Cub. And so that's all 3 of these decks are going to be based around Simba, Scrappy, Cub. Now, why do I say that? I say that because this is the exact same card as Pinocchio. Okay, like,
yep. There's the Amethyst version from Rise of the Floodborn that was the exact same thing. 2-drop, uninkable, 1/1 with 3 lore.
Yep, it's the exact same card, except it's in Ruby. And I think that Pinocchio is maybe the only thing that can rival this card for the best aggro card in the game. And this is, I'm making a generalization to rather make a point, which is that 3 questing on turn 2 is disgusting if you can protect it. And the way that Purple protected Pinocchio was to return it to the hand so that it can't be challenged again. What's really cool here, from a mana efficiency standpoint, is that Ruby doesn't have to do that, because you have Lefou Instigator, which allows you to ready a character when he comes into play. They can't quest for the rest of the turn, but that's fine. You've already quested, in theory, with Simba, Scrappy, Cub, or Lilo making a wish, and now Lefou is readying it up, and now it can't be challenged unless they can figure out a way to deal with it, right? Similarly, you have Fan the Flames, which is the same ability, just on an action card. It even has Lefou on it. And I believe Lefou's text has literally Fan the Flames. Yeah.
It's literally the same name. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that does the same thing, but as an action for 1. But the thing is that like Simba, Scrappy, Cub, and this Lefou package is very, very, very similar to what you've seen in the bounce package, the aggro bounce package. Now, the problem with the aggro bounce package was it was a little bit eclipsed by its control brethren, which used most of the same cards and did not have a real great way to consistently like close games the same way that like its Ruby Amethyst control brother could just do the same thing, but just diversify its list a little bit more. And so the best place that you saw the Pinocchio was in the Amber bounce deck, and you did near the end of the format. I think Ruby Amethyst bounce was coming back. But my whole point with this is to say is now there's yet another option that can be paired in a host of other colors and potentially separate from bounce. Now, if we look at this list, I kind of threw this together off of the concept of finding other things that would enable you to protect your stuff. So obviously, we have a little bit of the bodyguard with Simba. We have Baloo, right? We also have Bernard, which I think is a kind of an interesting, albeit a little bit of slower play, but being able to at the end of your turn, if it's exerted, you can ready another chosen character of yours. I don't know if these 4-drops in here would be as good if it wasn't for the fact that we have the discounting from Pluto and Doc. And so you even have the new card Wendy Darling, which I think is worth highlighting because it's a 1/3 that quests for 2 on 2.
Yeah.
I don't think we have that stat spread anywhere else in the game right now. So really interesting. And then of course Piglet can quest for 3 if you have enough units out.
Well, and let's highlight this card real quick too, because this was, I think, maybe the only card that I didn't touch on that was also in my list. I didn't talk about this in my Protect the President list, but I am also running Piglet in there too. This card could be a sleeper. It could be a dark horse card for aggro decks.
I would go as far as to say it's not a dark horse. It's like people are, if we're comparing this to fantasy football, no, people are drafting this. This is past sleeper status, I think.
Yeah. The 2/2 stat line worries me. Unlike some of the other things like the Wendy Darling and things where that we've talked about kind of in our own kind of private chat, how impactful a 3 defense stat line is, just because there's still at this point in the meta and this point in the card releases, not a whole lot that up until turn 3, turn 4 can really clear easily a 3 defense stat line. There are plenty of things that can clear a 2 defense stat line, even 1-drops. So if you don't have a way to protect it somewhere to the Simba Scrappy Cub, then you're kind of in range of being eliminated before you ever get that effect off. And while you have to have 2 other units in play, I think Piglet might in some cases get cleared before you get the effect off, but then you're eating removal.
That's exactly it. These decks are basically, they're banking, they're fast aggro decks that are banking on the fact that your opponent is not going to have the right thing right at the beginning of the game, right?
Yep.
And that's worth it. If Piglet comes down on 2 and gets hit by Fire the Cannons or whatever, oh well. You just play more things out, and you hope that your opponent doesn't have removal for that one. That's how these hyper aggro decks play. And that's very different from slower pace aggro decks, which are not as popular right now in the format, unfortunately. But they exist. Things like the evasive aggro list, which has a few things early in the game that are low defense, but later in the game, everything has 3 or more. And so I don't think that we can really count that against Piglet because almost everything else at that cost has 2 defense. So I think it's a fantastic card. Let's move over to another Lefou Fighters. This is a Ruby Emerald list. I think of the lists, this is the one that maybe has the least amount of sort of originality to it, in that it is sort of a blending of the hyper aggro with the evasive aggro. I could see this doing well, truthfully. This actually takes a little bit of time to fill in, or a little bit of space to fill in Teeth and Ambitions as a way to slow down faster aggro decks, something that, in my opinion, green aggro often has to do. Is it a lot of the evasive stuff takes a while to get going. They're usually a little understated in exchange for their evasiveness. And sometimes you don't have things, or informally, you didn't have something like Simba Scrappy Cub, which comes in with 3 questing pips. You also now have Cursed Merfolk. Cursed Merfolk finally dropping a 1 cost that quests for 2 for Emerald. So we're blending, right? We're taking the Merfolk, the Flynn's, the Enchantress, the Cheshire Cat, Simba Scrappy Cub, all things that are, not evasive, right? But have negative effects, many of them when they get cleared, or are simply just quest for a whole lot. And then, of course, finishing out the game with all of our evasives: Stylish Surfer Mini, Tinkerbell, Pongo, Ray, Genie on the Job, and Donald Duck. And this is, I I don't know if this really should be in it or not, but I have actually been beat by this several times in my local group. Shout out to Philip. Philip has been grinding the Emerald Ruby evasives and makes Donald Duck look like an MVP candidate. And I think that with Teeth Inhibitions is really interesting. I slipped in DeVille Manor because I think that in many ways, I feel like it's going to serve as a little bit of a curve filler, but also a little bit of a distraction for the opponent that isn't going to necessarily know what you're doing, because there's a lot of Ruby and Emerald things in the format that just came in that have location synergies. They're not going to know that you're not running it until game 2. So anyways,
it's absolutely the carrot in front of their face that says, come kill me over here. Like,
or else.
And don't look at my evasives that I'm playing, or these other high statted or high lore count units. Like DeVille Manor, you can probably clear it within a turn or two, depending on the units you have, pretty easily.
Yeah.
But all it takes is a turn or two of you not killing the 2 and 3 lore units for the game to get out of hand.
Well, and if they leave DeVille Manor alone, you're collecting 1 every turn until they finally do deal with it. So yeah, I'm actually pretty excited about this list. I think the Lefou synergizes great with a lot of the things in here. But let's look at the next one, which I think is just going to be the best aggro deck in the format. And that's Hyper Aggro Ruby Amethyst Bounce. If we
goodness, we're back.
If we have Simba Scrappy Cub with the Lefou Ready package over here, and we have the Pinocchio Bounce package over there, what a lovely marriage, right? Now you have 8 2-cost characters that quest for 3 that you get to include in your deck. The amount of consistency you're going to have in being able to drop a Pinocchio or Simba on turn 2, if you want it, is ridiculous.
And you Pascal, which is one of the most untouchable 1-drops.
Right. You have Maleficent biding her time. You have Pascal. Both great 1-drops. Both are perfectly fine to quest with and then bounce with Mim Snake, so that you can ink. If you have Pascal, you can ink it. If you have Maleficent biding her time, you can save it for a turn where you need to explode some questing onto the board, right? As I mentioned, Pinocchio and Simba Scrappy Cub, but you also have Pua, the pot-bellied buddy. What a great little piggy. Fantastic artwork. It's also a 2-drop that quests for 2. So again, staying turbo, and putting as much pedal to the metal on the questing front as we can, and it's inkable. That's kind of needed in a deck like this. You could toy with the numbers a little bit. I feel like Arthur should be a 3-buy and not a 4-buy, because it can really clunk your hand if you're not careful. But of course, that thing is nuts when it hits. It's also a huge target for the opponent. If you drop this on turn 4 or 5, along with a couple other 1-drops, they're going to go way out of their way to kill the Arthur. And me, having played against Hyper Aggro a lot, sometimes killing the Arthur, like, weirdly, even though they would have gotten more the next turn, it ends up putting me even further behind, because I have to commit multiple resources to dealing with this. Right. And then, of course, you have the Goat, Fox, Rabbit package. Pretty self-explanatory. The Stylish Surfer Mini, the Pongo, just great evasive questers. I mean, listen, there's nothing about this deck that is revolutionary, but it cannot be understated the impact that having Pinocchio redundancy and another 2-drop that quests for 2, it can't be understated how much that boosts the power level of something like this. So, strong candidate for best aggro deck in format. Certainly going to be the fastest aggro deck in format. What we'll need to see is Steel Deck's going to be low to the ground enough that they have the tools ready in hand in the first 3 turns to slow this down. Because if they don't, it's over.
Well, and I counted here, and hopefully my math is right, but you've got 21 different cards in this deck that can protect Pinocchio
Yep.
and Simba.
Yep.
That is disgusting. In a 60
Yep.
card deck, almost half of it protects the high value, very killable units that you really are prioritizing.
Mm-hmm.
It's insane, and they also gain value themselves. Like, it's not like they are just, hey, I'm going to protect, with the exception of Fan the Flames, which is literally stand the unit back up, but
Right.
they all have their own standalone value and lore count associated with them as well to be able to further the cause while they're also protecting your units. It would not surprise me one bit if this is a deck that just runs rampant because it's very streamlined. I don't think it, in most cases, with the exception of some tricky plays around maybe around Arthur or what target to bounce, I don't think it's going to be a hard deck to pilot. I think it is going to be. I think it's going to be one where you look at your hand and go, I'm going to play out as much as I can on curve. And then maybe you have a couple decision trees in turns 3, 4, and 5 based off of your opponent's deck.
I would argue that the first 3 turns are easy, and then every turn after that is actually really hard with a deck like this. And only because everything you do can be punished if you do it wrong. And so I think of the aggro decks, this maybe has the highest skill ceiling. But to your point, things that quest for 3 sometimes will just win even if you play bad. So I think this also has a decent skill floor compared to something like the bodyguard deck, which is going to be a little more on the margins of like, okay, you have to know your numbers on things. You have more inkable cards. So weirdly, you're making more decisions around what you ink, because in this deck, oftentimes a deck like this with this many uninkables, you're going to be like, well, I have to ink only this. This is all I can ink. And it reduces your choices for you. I think the key with this deck, and if somebody newer to the game was going to play this, sequencing. You have to make sure you're thinking about, do I quest with this first before I bounce it? Almost certainly. Do I want to, which of these things? Do I want to draw cards before I ink? Because I might get another inkable card. But if I do and I miss an inkable, what am I going to do? You have to think through your sequencing. But besides that, I mean, listen, 2 questings and 3 questing characters this cheap, like sometimes you'll just win because the opponent can't do anything.
I think you do have to be careful with this deck on your opening mulligan as well. I mean, I'm counting here just the amount of uninkables that you've got. I think you're sitting at 18.
18, I believe, is right.
Which is on the higher end of the uninkables. So it's almost as if you see a decent option in your hand that's inkable of a similar type, or you feel like you've got an early path that you can kind of count on of your hand, then maybe you almost hard ditch on inkables as long as they aren't like easy fits in your hand.
Yeah, you keep a 1-drop and you keep at least 2 inkables if you have them. So you can just get the game started regardless of what those inkables are. I mean, I think Pongo and Pua are probably the primary candidates, and probably a snake. Snakes are great, but you don't always want them on turn 2. So those are your 3 kind of prime candidates for inking. But hey, if you get double foxes,
Goat
you probably
well.
don't need 2 foxes.
I think you can
early in the game
early too.
Yeah, exactly. So anyways, that's Lefou's Fighters, 3 different versions. Go to town, gang.
Well, that's going to do it for our first video of the series for our aggro lists. We'll be back here shortly with 3 more videos exactly like this, where we're going to go over mid-range decks that we have built, control decks that we have built, and combo decks that we have built, so that we've got a little bit of flavor for whatever your kind of play style is, and hopefully a little something to get the juices flowing, get you started as Inklands drops. Feel free to come check us out on these videos for our other Lorcana content, where we go through other deck guides and other videos. Come join us on YouTube and check out our starter set, where we're going through a different digital card game every single month. Currently, for the month of February, we are going through Fights in Tight Spaces. We're having a lot of fun playing that game. It is so much fun. Also a card game. So if the card games are your jam, then you'll fit right in with that. So come see us on YouTube. Come check us out on Discord, and we'll see you on the next one.